My mother-in-law called me a gold digger, so I made sure she was there when I inherited more than her son. The accusation came at our wedding reception, whispered loud enough for half the table to hear. "She's only after the family money," Vivian hissed to her sister as I cut the cake 20 feet away. Poor Nathaniel can't see it, but I can. I met Nathaniel in grad school. We were both broke, surviving on ramen and student loans. We fell in love over shared textbooks and long all-night study sessions at the library. When he proposed with a ring he'd been saving for 6 months, I said yes because he made me laugh, not because of his trust fund. But Vivian saw my hand-me-downs and assumed I was looking for wealth. For 3 years, she made her feelings clear. She commented on my lucky choice of husband whenever I wore something new. She reminisced about Nathaniel's ex-girlfriend, an old money lawyer who understood their world. At family dinners, she would deliberately discuss the details of the inheritance, watching my face for signs of greed. "When Nathaniel inherits the estate," she would say, "he's going to need a wife who values tradition." The irony was delicious. She had no idea that my grandmother was quietly building an empire. While Vivian flaunted her family's modest wealth, my grandmother had started with nothing and amassed millions through real estate investments. She lived simply, driving the same car for 20 years, never mentioning her briefcase. Only I knew about the inheritance because I had helped manage her finances during her final illness. Every document, every deed, every investment statement. I had seen it all. The reading of the will was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon. My grandmother's lawyer had specifically requested that both families be present. Nathaniel suggested it was a formality, perhaps a small donation for the girl who had taken care of his mother-in-law. I smiled and said nothing. That morning, Vivian arrived in her finest pearls, ready to play the part of the noble matriarch, accepting thanks for her family's charity to my poor grandmother. She even brought her sister in as a witness to whatever paltry sum I had received. The lawyer began reading off small gifts to various charities, small sums to old friends. Then he moved on to the main will, to my beloved granddaughter who showed me what family really was. Vivian's face changed from polite attention to confusion as the numbers mounted. An office building downtown, an apartment complex across the river, a stock portfolio, vacation homes. When he finished, the room fell silent. "The total value of the estate," the lawyer concluded, "is approximately $47 million. Nathaniel's inheritance from his family was $2.3 million. Vivian's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. Her sister grabbed her arm to steady her. The woman who had called me a gold digger for years had just watched me inherit 20 times more than her precious son would ever see. "I think," I said sweetly, "you might want to reconsider your Christmas dinner guest list." But that was just the beginning, because 3 days later I discovered something in my grandmother's papers that would change everything we knew about both of our families. I was sitting in my grandmother's office, sorting through the last box of personal documents that hadn't been processed by lawyers. Birth certificates, old photographs, letters tied with ribbon, sentimental items that had no monetary value but told a story of a life. That's when I found a manila envelope with Vivian written on it in my grandmother's neat handwriting. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Property deeds from the 1960s, bank statements, and a letter dated just 3 months before my grandmother died. The letter was addressed to me, written in the shaky handwriting of her final days. "My dear granddaughter, if you are reading this, then you have discovered something I have hidden for 60 years. I pray that you have the wisdom to use this information better than I have." The woman calling herself Vivian Morrison was born Vivian Kowalski. Her father was my business partner in our first real estate venture. When that deal fell through in 1962, he stole $800,000 from our company and disappeared. I tracked him down for decades, only to discover that he died a pauper in Nevada, leaving his daughter to fend for herself. She changed her name, made up a new story, and married into what she thought was wealth. She has no idea that the fortune she envies was built in part on what her father stole from me. The irony would be funny if it weren't so tragic. I watched her treat you with disdain, never knowing that she owed her current lifestyle to money that was rightfully mine. Do with this information what you will. All my love, Grandma. I read the letter 3 times before the full weight of it sank in. Vivian, who had mocked my humble origins for years, was the daughter of a thief. Her entire social identity was built on a lie, and the money she'd inherited through her husband's family, money she claimed made her superior to me, had originally been stolen from my grandmother. But there was more in the envelope. Financial statements showing that when Vivian's father disappeared, my grandmother was left with massive debts that she'd been paying off for 15 years. Insurance documents detailing how her business partner's theft nearly cost her everything. And the most damning of all, a 1985 private investigator's report detailing how Vivian had systematically reinvented herself after high school. She had erased all traces of Vivian Kowalski, created fake college recommendations, even lied about her age, dropping 2 years to make herself more attractive to potential husbands. The woman who called me a gold digger was, after all, a gold digger. I leaned back in my grandmother's leather chair, my mind racing. It explained so much about Vivian's behavior. Her desperation to appear sophisticated, her obsession with pedigree and upbringing, her fear that someone might find out she was not who she seemed. She was projecting onto me the very criminal act she had committed, marrying for money while hiding her true past. The question was what to do with that information. I could have just put it aside, content with the poetic justice of knowing the truth. But then I thought about every snide comment, every put-down, every time she made me feel small at family gatherings. I thought about how she tried to convince Nathaniel that I wasn't worthy of his love. No, she'd spent 3 years trying to ruin my reputation. It was time for her to face the consequences of her choices. I made copies of everything and kept the originals in my safety deposit box. Then I called my grandmother's private investigator, a woman named Detective Reynolds, who specialized in background checks for wealthy families. "I need you to run some background checks," I told her. "Then I need you to write a comprehensive report." 3 weeks later, Detective Reynolds handed me a file that was even more damning than I'd hoped. Not only did she confirm every detail in my grandmother's paperwork, she uncovered additional deceptions. Vivian claimed to have attended Vassar, but the college had no record of her. She said her family owned a horse farm in Virginia, but no such property ever existed under either of her names. Even her supposed friendships with various society ladies were fiction. Most of them had never heard of her. The woman who had judged my worth for years had built her entire identity on a lie. But I didn't want a simple exposé. It seemed too easy, too crude. If I was going to end this, it would have to be done with the same precision with which my grandmother had built her empire. I waited for the perfect opportunity. It presented itself 6 weeks later when Vivian announced that she was throwing a charity gala to raise money for a children's hospital. It was exactly the kind of event she adored, a chance to play the part of a great hostess, reminding everyone of her family's generosity and social standing. She had invited 200 of the city's most influential citizens. There were the mayor, 3 city council members, the hospital board, local business leaders, and, of course, all the society ladies whose approval she desperately craved. "I hope you'll be there," she told me over Sunday lunch, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Though I understand if you'd feel out of place at such an event, even with the news of my inheritance." She couldn't help herself. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said. The gala was being held at a country club, the same place where she'd humiliated me at our wedding reception. She'd spared no expense. She'd hired a full orchestra and flown in flowers from Portland. The ballroom glittered with crystal and candles, and Vivian fluttered around like a queen holding court. She was wearing the family diamonds, a necklace that had belonged to Nathaniel's great-grandmother and was considered a family heirloom. At cocktails, I watched her accept compliments on her excellent upbringing and impeccable taste. The hypocrisy was astounding. During dinner, Vivian stood up to give a speech on the importance of supporting children's health care. She spoke movingly of family legacies and the responsibility of those blessed with wealth to help others. "Some of us," she said, looking directly at me, "realize that true nobility comes from bloodlines, not bank accounts." There was a murmur of approval from the room. Then I stood up. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly around the room, "I'd like to add something about family legacies." Vivian's face went white, but she couldn't stop me without causing a scene. "As many of you know," I continued, "I recently inherited my grandmother's estate. What you may not know is that my grandmother left behind more than just property and investments. She left behind the truth. I pulled out one document, a private investigator's brief formatted to look like a medical report. This is a genealogical research report commissioned to help the Children's Hospital understand the family histories of its major donors. Since Vivian has been so generous with her contributions, I thought the board members here today would be interested in learning about her remarkable family history." Vivian tried to interrupt, but I continued smoothly. You all knew that Vivian's real name was Vivian Kowalski, or that her father was Peter Kowalski, who disappeared in 1962 after stealing over $800,000 from his business partner, my grandmother. The room went dead silent. The private investigator's report is fascinating, I said, passing copies to nearby tables. It shows how Vivian completely reinvented herself after high school. New name, new background, even a new birth year. She claimed to have attended Vassar, even though they have no record of her. She talked about her family's horse farm in Virginia, even though no such property ever existed. The irony of it all, I continued, is that the wealth she married into, the foundation of her social standing, was built in part on money her father stole from my family. For 60 years, she lived off her father's crime while calling other people gold diggers. Vivian finally found her voice. That's slander, she shrieked. You can't prove it. Actually, I said calmly, I can. Every document has been reviewed by licensed detectives and backed up by court records, college transcripts, and property deeds, or lack thereof. I turned to address the room. I'm not sharing this information to humiliate Vivian. Well, not primarily. I share it because, as my grandmother's heir, I feel a responsibility to address a theft that was never prosecuted. The $800,000 that Peter Kowalski stole would be worth about $6.2 million today. The room buzzed with whispers as people calculated why I announced, I will be making a donation to Children's Hospital tonight in the exact same amount, $6.2 million, to finally settle this family debt. The applause that followed was deafening. Vivian stood frozen in the spotlight, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The socialites who once reported to her whispered over their programs. City council members studied documents with grim expressions. The hospital board president was already calculating how to distance the institution from the scandal. I'd also like to announce, I continued, that I'm establishing the Meredith Fund, named after my grandmother, to provide financial assistance to victims of white-collar crime, because sometimes the damage from a theft goes far beyond the original crime. As I sat down, the room erupted in heartfelt applause. People stood up, came to my table to congratulate me, and offered their support for the fund. Vivian stood at the podium, abandoned and exposed. Finally, she stumbled off the stage and ran from the room, leaving behind her purse, her dignity, and any semblance of social standing. But I wasn't done with her yet. The next morning brought a flood of phone calls. Reporters wanted interviews about the family scandal. The district attorney's office called to discuss whether statute of limitations issues were preventing prosecution. Civic groups began quietly removing Vivian from their boards and committees. By noon, 3 different gossip magazines had called to fact-check stories about Kowalski's fraud that were scheduled to appear in their upcoming issues. But the most satisfying call was from Nathaniel. Is it true? He asked simply. Every word, I answered. There was a long pause. I need to ask you something, and I need your complete honesty. Did you marry me knowing this? Was this some kind of elaborate revenge plot? I could hear the pain in his voice, and my heart sank a little. Nathaniel, I said softly, I found out about your mother's past 3 days after my grandmother died. 3 months after we got married. I fell in love with you when we were both broke grad students. Remember? Your mother's lies don't change that. Another pause. What do you want me to do about it? Nothing, I said. This was between your mother and me. You are not responsible for what she did before you were born. But she was terrible to you. If I had known, you would have done exactly what you did. I interrupted. You defended our marriage when she tried to break us up. You chose me, despite her disapproval. That's all I ever needed. Nathaniel came home that night exhausted. She left town, he said. She packed up and left. No return address. She emptied her bank accounts and just disappeared. How do you feel about that? He was silent for a long moment. Relieved, mostly, and ashamed that I'm relieved. What son is relieved when his mother leaves? The one whose mother was toxic, I said softly. You are not responsible for her choices, past or present. I think about everything she said about you all the time, all the ways she tried to make you feel unwanted. If she knew her past, she would. I'm saying that's why she was so mean. She was afraid someone would find out the truth about her, so she attacked first. Classic distraction. Will she come back? I doubt it. Her entire social identity was built here. She can't handle the humiliation of staying in a place where everyone knows the truth about her. We were right. Vivian never came back. 6 months later, we learned from Uncle Nathaniel that she had moved to Florida and was using her maiden name again, although whose maiden name no one knew. She apparently told her new neighbors that she was a widow whose ungrateful children had stolen her inheritance. The lies continued, but at least it was someone else's problem. Now the scandal had unexpected benefits. The story of my grandmother's stolen money and my donation to Children's Hospital had attracted significant media attention, attracting donors to the Meredith Foundation from all over the country. Within a year, we had raised enough money to help more than 300 families who had been victims of financial fraud. More importantly, the truth about Vivian's past seemed to inspire others to share their stories of toxic family members hiding behind a false facade of respectability. I received hundreds of letters from people who had been manipulated, made to doubt themselves, or abused by relatives who presented perfect facades to the outside world. One letter in particular touched me. It was from a woman named Clara, whose sister had been taking money from family members for years while claiming to be a successful entrepreneur. In reality, she was using the funds to support her gambling addiction, living in a fantasy world of her own making. Your story gave me the courage to finally tell the truth about what she did to our family, Clara wrote. For years, I defended her reputation because I thought that's what family was supposed to do. But reading about how you dealt with your mother-in-law made me realize that defending the truth is more important than defending a lie. These responses reminded me of why my grandmother had kept those documents all these years. She understood that sometimes the truth has to wait for the right time, the right person, the right opportunity to create change, not just destruction. A year after the gala, Nathaniel and I could finally have a normal relationship with his father's family without Vivian's constant manipulation and poison. Family gatherings became genuinely pleasant. His cousins admitted they had never liked her, but felt obligated to be polite. His uncle admitted he had always suspected she was lying about her past, but had been reluctant to investigate. The signs were obvious, he said. He said she knew too little about the time periods she claimed to have lived through. Her stories never added up. But confronting her would mean confronting the fact that we had all been deceived. It was a reminder that Vivian had deceived more than just herself. She built a web of complicity around her lies, making everyone who bought into her false story a participant in the deception. The most healing moment came 2 years after the scandal, when I received a letter from the director of Children's Hospital. Your donation has allowed us to open a new wing dedicated to treating underprivileged children, she wrote. We have named it the Meredith Family Center in honor of your grandmother's legacy. Every day, children receive life-saving care because of what your family's truth made possible. I thought of my grandmother, who had carried the burden of what had been stolen from her for 60 years. She used that pain to fuel her determination to build something better, to create wealth that could serve a purpose beyond simply amassing more wealth. In the end, Vivian's theft, both her father's original crime and her own theft of truth and dignity, had been transformed into something that saved lives. It seemed like the kind of justice my grandmother would have appreciated. 3 years later, I was pregnant with our first child, and Nathaniel and I were debating what to name her. How about Meredith? He suggested. After your grandmother. I thought about it. Actually, I've thought about that, but maybe something that honors what she taught me rather than just who she was. What do you mean? She taught me that the truth has power, even if it takes decades to uncover. That patience and preparation are more important than immediate revenge. That sometimes the best way to deal with toxic people is to give them enough rope to hang themselves with. Okay, but how does that translate into a name? I smiled. What about Veritas? That means truth in Latin and sounds common enough that she wouldn't have to explain it all my life. Veritas Morrison, he said slowly. I like it. A strong name for a strong girl with grandmother's fortune and family history of the struggle against those who consider themselves untouchable, I added. Speaking of her, Nathaniel said, I have news about my mother. My eyebrows went up. Haven't heard from Vivian since she fled to Florida. Private. The detective called. Apparently, she tried the same scam in Naples. Claimed to be a wealthy widow from an old Charleston family. She even found a new victim, a widower, who owns a chain of luxury car dealerships. Let me guess. Someone realized she was lying. His daughter-in-law is a genealogist, specializing in family histories for estate planning. She became suspicious when my mother could not provide any specific details about his supposed family history, and started an investigation. What she found? All. The whole history of Peter Kowalski. Name change, even news articles about the Gala scandal. It turns out that lying about your identity much more difficult in the internet age. What happened to her? The man called off their engagement and asked her leave his house immediately. But here's the interesting part. His daughter-in-law said, "My mother wasn't even embarrassed. She just packed her things and said she'd find a place where a woman of quality would be appreciated." I shook my head. She still lives in her fantasy world, apparently. But her new story is that she is the victim of a financial scam committed by her cruel stepfathers. She tells people that we somehow stole her rightful inheritance. Of course we did. People like your mother never take responsibility for their own choices. There's always someone else to blame. Do you think we should warn people about her? Let them know what she's really like? I thought about it. Number. Really. About people like Vivian always is revealed over time. She will continue to lie, try to deceive people, and eventually she will choose someone who will not deceived. The internet makes almost impossible to completely erase your past more, so we'll just let her continue to hurt people. We'll let her continue to expose herself. Every lie she tells makes her more vulnerable to detection. Every scam she tries to pull leaves more evidence. She's her own worst enemy. We don't have to do anything except let her be herself. That was the truth. Over the course of 6 months, we heard that Vivian had tried and failed to break into 3 different social media platforms. Groups in Florida. Every time someone did a basic internet search and found news about her scandal. Every time she quietly were excluded from events and social groups. The final report came from a private detective a year later. She moved to Arizona, Detective Reynolds told me. A small town outside Phoenix. She now uses an entirely different name. Victoria Morrison claims to be a retired art dealer from San Francisco. Any new victims? She's trying to join a local history and gardening society, but she hasn't had any luck so far hooking anyone financially. I think she's running out of resources. The lifestyle she is accustomed to requires money, and she doesn't have the skills to make it legally. Will you keep an eye on her? But frankly, I think she's becoming irrelevant. She's in her 70s, living in a 1-bedroom apartment, telling increasingly desperate lies to people who don't have the kind of money she used to target. She's more pathetic than dangerous now. That was the last I heard of Vivian, or Victoria, or whoever she called herself. But the impact of standing up to her continued to have a positive effect on my life. The Meredith Foundation grew into a nationally recognized organization that helped victims of financial fraud navigate legal and financial issues. We've helped over 1,000 families and inspired similar organizations in 12 other states. More personally, this experience has taught me something important about dealing with toxic people. The best defense against manipulation is truth, preparation, and patience. Vivian counted on me being too polite, too shocked, or too scared to fight back effectively. She miscalculated. When Veritas was born, I looked into her tiny face and made a promise. "You will always know the truth about your family," I whispered. "The good, the bad, and the complicated. No lies, no pretense, no family secrets that could be used against you later. Because that's what my grandmother left me. Not just money, but the understanding that the truth is the most valuable legacy of all. And unlike money, the truth cannot be stolen, squandered, or lost. It can only be ignored, hidden, or distorted. But it never disappears entirely. It waits, patiently and persistently, for the right moment to reveal itself. And when it does, it has the power to change everything." 5 years later, I received the last correspondence related to the Vivian saga. It was a death certificate, handed over by a private investigator. Vivian, by whatever name she had used, had died in a Phoenix hospital. The family had not claimed the body. Her belongings fit into 2 cardboard boxes, and her bank account contained $247. The woman who had spent her life chasing wealth and status had died alone and poor. Her identity had been so warped by lies that even the coroner had trouble establishing her true identity. The irony was not lost on me, but I felt no satisfaction in her death, only sadness at a life spent in deceit and bitterness. That evening, I told Nathaniel about the death certificate. How do you feel about it? He asked. Mostly empty. She never figured out how to be happy with the truth about who she was. She spent 70 plus years running from herself. Do you regret exposing her? I considered it carefully. No, not because she deserved to be humiliated, but because she had to be stopped. She had hurt people, including you. And sometimes the only way to stop someone who is intent on lying is to make the truth impossible to ignore. Would you do it again? I would try to find a way that didn't involve public humiliation. But if that didn't work, yes, the truth trumps comfort. That night, I walked into Veritas's room and watched her sleep. She was 4 years old, full of questions about everything, unafraid to speak her mind, completely sure of her place in the world. She would never have to wonder if her family loved her for who she was or for what she represented. She would never have to hide parts of herself to be accepted. She would grow up knowing that honesty, even when it's difficult, is always better than lies, even when they're convenient. And if anyone ever tried to manipulate her the way Vivin had tried to manipulate me, she would have the tools to recognize it and the strength to fight back. It seemed like the most valuable legacy I could give her. The truth, the whole truth, and the confidence to use it wisely. Because after all, that was what my grandmother had given me. Not financial wealth, which meant nothing without the honesty to use it well, and the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge was not retribution. It was becoming everything the person who hurt you could never be. Honest, generous, strong enough to build rather than tear down, and confident enough in your truth that other people's lies could not touch you. I closed the door to Veritas quietly and went to find Nathaniel. We had a future to build, and for the first time in years, we could build it without the shadow of someone else's deception. The truth had set us free,